Welcome everyone to Special Education Legal Fund's first webinar of 2022. This webinar is called A Life Plan for Special Education Advocacy, and we are so thrilled to welcome our four distinguished panelists to the webinar tonight. My name is Christine Lai, and I'm the Executive Director and Co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. First of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors for the Parent Education Webinar Series, Winston Preparatory School, American School for the Deaf, Chapel Haven Schliefer Center, Fusion Academy, the Pinnacle School, the Spire School, Villa Maria School, and Hubbard Day School. Thank you to our sponsors. Before we begin, I wanted to share a few words about Special Education Legal Fund for those of you who are not familiar with us. Special Education Legal Fund, or S.E.L.F, was founded in 2018 to provide grants for families in need with children in the special education system. Since our founding, we have provided over $430,000 in grants for legal support to 100 families from qualified special education attorneys in 40 school districts across Connecticut and Westchester County. Our next webinar will take place on February 2nd, focusing on therapeutic special education schools. We're very pleased to welcome Shrub Oak School, Glenholm School, the Spire School, and attorney Dana Johnson for this really insightful, I think, exploration of what exactly is a therapeutic special education school. Our next webinar after that in March is on understanding residential outplacement, and will feature a panel of special education attorneys, including Paul Barger, Meredith Braxton, Jerry McMahon, and Piper Paul. You can register for both of these webinars through Eventbrite. There will be links available either on the Eventbrite channel or on Facebook via our Facebook page. Since we're talking about advocates, I wanted to spend some time talking about the advocacy support program that Special Education Legal Fund offers. The program provides families in need, it was launched this year, provides families in need with $1,000 in special education advocacy support from a qualified advocate on our list. This program has been made possible through the support of Greenwich International Film Festival and Fairfield County's Community Foundation. And you can find information about this program and begin the application process by visiting our website under the Programs tab. Advocacy support program requirements for families are as follows. All applicants to this program must be below 300% of the federal minimum poverty line. If you look at the chart here, you can see on the bracketed line what 300% of the federal poverty level is, or you can simply Google this online, find the number that corresponds with your household, whether you have 4 people in your household or 5, and multiply by 3 in order to get the level of income qualification. Applicants must also have a child or children with a current IEP or a 504 plan. Applicants to this program must reside in Connecticut. And as I said previously, to apply, just visit our website under the Programs tab, www.spedlegalfund.org/programs to initiate the pre-screening process. The review timeline is pretty simple. Once you've initiated the pre-screening, we will send you an application. After you've returned the application to us, along with the supporting documents, we will schedule time for a parent or guardian interview. We review every application at the end of the month between the 22nd and the 30th, and we notify all families by the end of the month. So documents are due on the 15th of each month. The interview must be done by the 22nd, and notification happens by the 30th or the 31st. If you've been approved for this program to receive a grant of $1,000, you as an applicant will then have 30 days to secure representation from a special education advocate that is on our list. The list will be provided to you when you're approved for the program. Otherwise, it is available on our website. We request that you, as a grant recipient, interview more than one advocate just to make sure that the fit is right, the needs are right, the financial parameters are understood, and just the personality-wise, it just makes sense to interview more than one person. All of our grants are paid directly to advocates, and no grants are paid to families directly. And only special education, this is important for families to understand, only special education advocates who are on the list are eligible to receive funds on behalf of grant recipients. And so now we get to our webinar. This is the reason we're all here. I'm so pleased to welcome Ann Munkenbeck back to this is I guess you're a second time panelist for us, I think. And we're super excited to have you back. Ann has vast experience as a special education advocate, helping families navigate the process from birth to adulthood, really. And she's really focuses on teaching families to effectively advocate for their child, and also serves on the board of ABC Wilton, and has a particular interest, I think, in in dyslexia and as a learning disability, and also I think recently received your master's degree. Is that correct? In special education with a concentration in assistive technology. So congratulations, and we're so excited to have you back on our panel tonight. Our next, advocate on the panel is Virginia Blum. I am so excited to have Virginia. Virginia's, an old hand at this webinar thing with us. I've known Virginia for a long time and have first came to know Virginia as a mom whose advocacy skills on behalf of her daughter with autism, really actually blew me away, and really has formed the inspiration for your career as a special education advocate. Her empathy and understanding of parents' experience really has formed the basis of her advocacy practice. So we're really excited to welcome Virginia back to our panel program. Our third panelist is Jill Chuckas. Jill is, a tremendous force in the advocacy community, honestly. She has over 25 years of experience. Oh, wait, let me flip the page, sorry. Jill has more than 25 years of experience, in this field and with children. And we are really, really excited that she's joining us. This is your first panel for us. I'd heard about Jill, way before I ever met her, and really, not only like, through the community, but from lawyers and from, school districts. So, really the work that, that you've done on behalf of families is tremendous. And we're really, really excited to have you tonight. And last but not least, there's been a little change to the, to tonight's program. And Lara Damashek, who is the founder of Early Insight Advocacy, is a former public school teacher, SPED attorney, and, an all around just amazing person, in addition to being a board member of S.E.L.F, is actually going to be the moderator of the panel this evening. I'm not able to attend the rest of the panel, but I leave you all in great hands, because I know that Lara, in addition to her experience as a special education attorney, former experience, is also a privately practicing special education advocate, as well as a CSE representative at an independent special education school in New York. So she has really unique experience, and I'm so grateful to have you, because you really bailed me out today. So thank you. Lastly, before we get to the good stuff, I have to read this disclaimer. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York. It is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the members of the panel. For webinar participants, this panel should be viewed as a public forum. Please do not ask questions via the Zoom platform, either in the Q&A or the chat, with identifiable information about your child or your child's legal or educational situation. Please refrain from any comments including identifiable information about your child, including name, grade, school, or school district. Please remember that your screen name may be visible to the participants in the panel, as well as the panelists and Special Education Legal Fund. This webinar is being recorded and may be distributed or shown at a later date at the discretion of Special Education Legal Fund. And there you have it.
Okay. Thank you, Christine. I think I'll jump right into the questions we have for our wonderful panelists. The first question I have is, when do parents most commonly reach out to you as a special education advocate? And anyone who'd like to can start.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Generally in crisis. So we get that late day email or very long voicemail in the middle of the day, and it's an absolute crisis where things are falling apart, and the kid's getting restrained or is reading 3 grades below grade level, and the parent just had a meeting and doesn't know what to do with themselves. So that's typically when they come to see us. I can share, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree, I wish that families would start coming to us before the crisis, in order for us to help support a version of the crisis.
And are you all, Virginia or Anne, you want to comment on that?
I was just going to say that one thing I often share with families is, the document that you receive at the end of the day is confusing. It's each page is not spelled out. It's using language that and acronyms that are like trying to interpret a whole new language. And I often say to parents, would you sign a contract without having somebody read it or understanding what you're agreeing to? And so in some of that, just knowing and talking to somebody that understands what each page means and what you're agreeing to in that program, I think is very helpful. So even if it's just a little education and you're not needing somebody to support in a meeting, but just understanding your document, that's another reason why I think advocates can really help you navigate and learn some of that lingo so that you don't feel like a fish out of water when you're attending meetings.
Yeah, and I'll add that as advocates, we're there to help you, the family, learn about the process and kind of get through the weeds of what everything means, as Virginia says. I don't always experience a crisis situation with families that come to me, but generally speaking, there is some very short timeline where I'm needed either in a meeting or to help them make a decision about something, which is somewhat challenging if I don't have the background information about the particulars of that child, because every situation is so unique and individualized depending on what that particular child's journey has been or what their needs might be going into the future. So I always urge parents to try to back up at least a couple of weeks until we have an opportunity to get to know each other and have some file review process go on so we can plan a strategy together going forward.
And when you say back up a few weeks, do you mean back up from when they want to attend the meeting or take action?
Right, exactly. So instead of waiting until, reaching out a week before and realizing, oh my goodness, I really don't understand this. The last time it didn't go so well. I really need some support. If, once that kind of idea is tickling your brain, act on it sooner rather than later. That would be my recommendation. And I've had a lot of experience with this as a mother of children with disabilities. And so I understand the angst that goes into this process and how challenging and overwhelming it can be. And just having another person there to shoot ideas with and to kind of clear the mud of all that terminology is really, really helpful and supportive.
So, Jill, you brought this up earlier. There's a difference between when clients come to you and when you wish they would come to you. So when would be the ideal time for a family to come to you before engaging in an advocacy or an advocate relationship with them?
So I'm going to be very blunt and honest. The summer, when nobody is thinking about school and they're all so relieved to have a break, that is the absolute best time to get in touch. The second best time is early fall. often folks will come to us about this point of the year. And I can speak for myself. I'm not able to take on new families by this time of year. Usually by beginning in November, I'm pretty booked. And I know it's different for each advocate and whatnot. But the summer is almost always the best time, and then early fall. That gives us, to Anne's point, that gives us the opportunity to get to know our family. There's a lot of history we have to go through. Having known both Virginia and Anne for a number of years now, I know we all do a very thorough record review. We like to go through at least 2 to 3 years worth of documents and really get a thorough social history and academic history. So in order to really make sure that we're doing that, those timeframes are better. That said, I would concur with what Anne said, is that sometimes when I do have a new family come to me and it's the PPTs next week, if we're not in crazy crisis mode, and by crazy crisis mode, I mean kids being kicked out of school, I do also would try to push that back maybe 2 weeks minimum, in order to give myself the time to go through things, because very often, we'll send comments, questions in advance of the meeting. And I want to allow the process of collaboration with the school team whenever humanly possible. And if I'm coming in really quickly, it's harder to do that as well.
And that's very helpful, specific advice. And what about just in general, when should a parent, what if someone, I'm sure there are people watching saying, I don't know, do I need an advocate? I think I'm getting what I should be getting from early intervention. When is an ideal time, I guess, in the child's educational journey to consult with an advocate? Are there better times? Are there, certain crossroads where you feel like an advocate should at least be consulted?
Well, I'm just gonna say all the time, because there's so much knowledge that we have as advocates. We've gone through extensive trainings. We've gone to school to learn about the disability categories. Or we've worked with our own children through the process, and it's very rare that a parent has that level of experience to understand how complicated the process is. It's not just understanding what your own child's needs are. It's also understanding the kind of the framework of what the public education system is, and how to navigate that process, and what's appropriate to ask for, and how to interpret testing, assessment, readouts or recommendations, all of that. And even who the players are, and how to negotiate and how to strategize. So the more time an advocate has to work with the family prior to the need to come to the table with the district, the more powerful the family's position is, because the advocates had an opportunity to go through, as Jill said, all those records and take a deep dive into it. There's always some little nugget in there that's really going to help move the case forward. But it takes time. Sometimes it takes time to find it.
Well, Anne, I thought you said something really great there about knowing what to ask for, because oftentimes I have families that come to me and say, oh, I just accepted the document and accepted the goal, and didn't know that I could answer or ask a question, or didn't know I could ask for testing. And I noticed that my kid wasn't writing the letters, the way they should, but I didn't know I should pull in the occupational therapist. So I think that trusting that process to kind of play out is sometimes you need somebody in there that's asking that question for you and knowing where that discussion is leading. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I often say to people when they say, well, I can do the first PPT, I really need you there for the second one. And I often encourage parents, I'm like, look, the first one's just as important, because if I'm not getting the evaluations that I need, I don't have the information to drive the discussion, at the second meeting. So I think sooner rather than later, so that you're getting it, you're building the house appropriately, is a nice way to think about it.
I wanted to add though, for parents or caregivers or whoever's listening, I don't feel bad about what your process has been, because nobody knows until they know. And I know that in my experience, I felt terrible that it didn't occur to me to do X, Y, Z or whatever it was step in to support my children. But there's no way that you would know that until you actually have experience with it. So it's just, seize what you can and move forward with it as best you can.
Yeah, that it's so important that you state that. And I think the other thing too, and Laura, this kind of piggybacks a little bit on the second part of your question, is are there other ideal times? So yes, right away, but also in major transitions. So I saw in the chat that there was a comment about, always referring right at when birth to 3 goes to the IEP process, when pre-K goes to kindergarten, when 5th grade goes to middle school, 8th grade goes to 9th grade. Those are also other key points in timeframes, as well as when triennial evaluations are happening. Mm-hmm. I find teams are most open and closed to changes in the IEP during triennial times. So sometimes they'll be willing to add in tons and tons of goals and supports. And other times they're like, oh, they did so great on the evals, we don't need this anymore. So for both reasons, those are also important timeframes. So to Anne's point, please don't second guess yourself and say, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible parent and I should have done this sooner. Think about right now where you're at and what you can learn from the process, and understand that one thing that's also very different from an advocate to an attorney, and I know that that's not our discussion point today, but advocates we do a lot of hand-holding. We do a lot of explanations. We do a lot of counseling with you to help you understand the process. The attorneys are like, give me this document and blah, 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 and then we're done, right? So it's a very different process. I often have families who end up needing an attorney come back to me and say, oh, I really miss talking to you. But I think it's an important point to recognize as well that we really will handhold you through the process and give you a lot of coaching. So I know I can only speak for Virginia and myself, but we have a handful of clients that we don't ever go to meetings with, that we literally just prep them and coach them and maybe do an agenda for them and help them feel better about what they're doing in their meetings. So the range of things that we can do, if you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to bring someone to the meeting because then they're going to be mad at me. Well, they aren't, they deal with that. But if that's really a limiting factor for you, know that we're excellent coaches too, and listeners in that to help support you and figure out what the next step is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jill. I mean, as stated in the beginning, it's really one of my goals is to educate parents in this process. So we, as you said, we really are helping you not only navigate what your child's needs are, but also understanding what your needs might be to help your child in the future, because eventually, it'll just be you and your child as they grow older. But in addition to that, it's important to remember that if you might feel like you shouldn't bring an advocate or attorney or some other person to your PPT process, but it is not only your right to have whatever representation you want at that meeting, it sometimes can really help the team process move forward, because there's a language that you learn in this profession that the school knows. And we're very well versed in that you might not have as much experience with. And so when terms are being thrown back and forth or ideas are being thrown back and forth, there's kind of a commonality of understanding if you have somebody on who's supporting you through that process. So it can really facilitate the collaboration, I think. I've often had team members thank me for that because it's just helped families understand what the needs are going forward and what's appropriate and what might not be appropriate. So it can go both ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be contentious. In fact, I feel if it's contentious, then we're not effective. So.
And what are some of the common mistakes you see that parents make or have made when they've come to you? And we're not, we don't want to be too hard on parents. Everyone knows that when it comes to your own child, emotions run high, and you're speaking first and foremost as the parent. And then I think you learn a whole deal about this language that you're explaining of how to be an advocate. But when parents are, before they've come to you, what do you think are some of the common mistakes they have already made? And not to feel bad about, but we have a good audience.
So I think mistakes is a harsh word, but
yes.
the one thing that I would say is read your document, read if you don't understand it, if you don't want to hire an advocate, ask the school, but you should know what's in that. You should read those minutes. You should take your own notes and kind of compare it. And the other place that I often talk about is that there is a parent concern section that is in the document. It's actually on page 4, right after the heading is present levels of performance. But oftentimes I'm sitting down, and my process and Jill's process is that we sit down and I do this I have the child's records, but I'm not looking at them. I'm talking to the parent and discussing and getting their opinion and their feedback on what they see is the problem, what they see how they see their child, so that I can then go back and look at and do a record review. But oftentimes the parent is saying, well, I expressed in the meeting that I was not in agreement with A, B, and C. And then I will quickly flip to the document and read the parent concern statement. And one of the things that it says is the parent was in complete agreement with everything that was discussed at the meeting.
Right.
Always.
Someone's actually asking about this in the chat, something along these lines. So shouldn't all of this be written onto the IEP?
Yeah. Yeah. It absolutely has to.
It has to be. And so I will point that out, and then that will make a parent like, well, that didn't happen. But then, read your document, know what your document says. And that's part of our process is I also tell parents that, the process doesn't start after the meeting is ended. So the best money that I think anybody spends with me is often that final review. So we've had a meeting, we've had a lot of productive things happen, we've agreed to a lot of great things, or maybe we didn't, and we wanted to note that on prior written notice. But the biggest thing is give me that final document and let me read it at the end of it and compare it to what my notes were and what my recollection is, or the recording, so that we can make sure that it actually has everything in there that we discussed. And it never does. It never has everything in there. I mean, I can't, I always have feedback. And you can amend it. There's lots of things, we can send a letter, we can have it amended. We can at least record that we're not in agreement at this point. And the other strategy, and Jill, you taught me this, but is if I'm going into a meeting where it's a triennial or an annual or just a meeting where I want to make sure that my parents' voice is heard, I have them write a parent concern letter, because then I don't have to rely on the school district to document parent concerns. I'm handing them a typed letter that the parent has spent time at before the meeting, looking at the information. Sometimes I'll give them some talking points or some information that I think is important to be included, and I always review it and we talk through it together. But that way, when I'm in the meeting, I can look at the district and say the parent has prepared a statement that they'd like to share, and I'd like it to be included in the document and part of this child's educational records. And then there's no discrepancy with what the parents' voices in that meeting and what the parents' concerns are, or what the parent's happy with. So I just think, but again, reading their document, I would say is the number one thing that I think parents often don't do that could be very helpful.
And I wanted to chime in there because you said the word document a lot of times, and it has lots of different meanings. And I want to reframe that word a little bit for our listeners. You need to document everything that happens. So that's another common thing that I see happen with families that are like, oh, they called me up and we had a great talk. Okay. And so what happened after that talk? Well, oh yeah, that didn't happen, or this didn't happen. So it's so important to document those conversations. I think it's often easier to have a phone call, but there are districts that we work with that intentionally do a phone call in order to not write anything down. So if it's not written down, it didn't happen, people. I mean, that's like rule number one. So when you're thinking about documents, yes, you need to read every paper they give you. And if you don't agree with something in it, then you need to write them an email and tell them, you know, this was wrong, or this isn't my recollection, and all of that. But just keep writing it down, because that paper trail will sometimes be the thing that helps you get the compensatory services because they didn't do something for your kid, or helps you get that additional session of reading, or that after school piece, or whatever it is. Sometimes that will be the saving grace that you have documented something. So that word document is key in multiple ways.
And it also, I think, can cut through maybe some of the disagreements where if it's really clearly stated somewhere and it's shared with the team, then there's no discrepancy about what those requests are, what those areas of concern are. I would add another thing that I think is really important for parents to read and ask the providers who have done this, the evaluations, if they could explain things to the parents if they don't understand what the recommendations are or what the dialogue means. But to read the assessments for your children, to really understand what their challenges might be and what their strengths are. And they're challenging to read through if you don't have a degree in that area, but you are entitled to, once again, access to the people who have done the evaluations in the school to explain those evaluations to you in a way that hopefully you can understand and use going forward. Even after that conversation with the evaluator, it still might be a little foggy. Google is an amazing thing. There's so much information there that can help clarify or give you more information about specific things. So I just encourage you to research or seek out, S.E.L.F or other organizations to help clarify some of these really complicated things that are occurring in special education.
And on the other hand, what do you think are the most common mistakes that the school districts are making when they're communicating with families? So what should parents, be on the lookout for in terms of, what's not necessarily kosher?
Oh boy.
I know.
It's a hard one to tie up into that little bow.
Yeah, there's a lot of meat to that.
In terms of the communication process, what?
Just with the communication process, lack of communication, lack of responding to parents. Right. Yeah. So parents are endlessly sending emails. Districts are not responding in a timely fashion. As Jill said, they prefer to have the telephone conversation, which is difficult to document, using that word again. So communication-wise, I think it's not always a two-way street. And
one thing I find is like when a parent, for example, is contacted about a meeting, they're told you have a meeting on such and such date, and they're
exactly what I was going to say.
They're told this is when the meeting is, and
we only have 30 minutes, and there's only 30 minutes for it too.
Well, yeah, that's a problem.
Right. I'm always shocked that
acceptable.
I always say to the first thing I say to the parent is, okay, well, that's the proposed date of the meeting. It has to be at a mutually agreed upon time and place. So that's just when they'd like to schedule the meeting. And it's like, oh, parents are not even told that they are, very often not told that they're a member of the team who needs to weigh in and, needs to be available for the meeting. So I always find that interesting.
That's such a great point too, Lara, because I don't think parents often feel that they are part of the meeting. And I do find that school teams, it's not always intentional, but they'll get so bogged down in the language that they're sharing and in needing to report out on their area that, I mean, how many times have I been in a meeting and, they won't ask for the parents' input, which is really where this whole parent statement thing started many years ago when I started in advocacy. It is remarkable to me. And I'm seeing in the chat a very good comment from someone I know who is sharing that. I was just
going to text you, Jill.
Yeah, that the parents are the most important person in that meeting, Deidre. Thank you for reminding everybody of that. They are. But often, and again, I don't think it's always intentional, but a parent is made to feel that they are just there to listen and to be quiet, that we know what to do, we're the school, we're the experts. But it's interesting. And again, this is part of the process, right, of getting to know our family. When we're talking to our families, they might say something about their kid, and that makes me go, let me ask you about this. And so then we'll get down to a concern that they've had in their gut that they didn't know how to name it, right? So it's super important to allow the parents their rightful spot at that table, and for parents to embrace it. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to talk, so do your parent statement, but it's very frustrating when school teams belittle, inadvertently or intentionally, the parents' role in that process.
Or glaze over what the parents are bringing to the table. But I just wanted to share that another aspect of that is one way that districts quite often limit the parents' input is either not allowing them enough time to talk if they are comfortable talking, and or limiting the time of the meeting. Just know that you are entitled to as much time as you need to address all of your concerns as parents. And if you're running up against a district that said, but we need to let so-and-so go, you can easily excuse that person if they're no longer needed at the meeting, or you can say, okay, this is fine, we will table the rest of the discussion, and we can reconvene. And I always try to have them set a date and time right there and then. It doesn't always work, but as soon as possible, and we'll always follow up with that. But this is an interesting question. I just wanted to address this quickly from somebody in the chat about, can you trust the evaluations from the school? Is it a conflict
I'm actually responding to it. You go ahead verbally. I'm responding to it in writing. Go ahead.
So, you know, I always like to trust professionals to do a professional job, and people in school districts are professionals. But if you disagree with what those findings are, you are entitled to request that an independent educational evaluation be conducted at the district expense, and that you choose the provider. Now it gets sticky, and we're not going to get into the weeds of how that process works out, but there are things that parents can do if they disagree with the evaluation, or they don't technically feel like that evaluation represents how they experience their child.
And one thing I just wanted to add real quick is I think it's important to note that you can call a PPT meeting at any time. So you do not have to have these meetings just one time a year. And the other thing I think is if you really want a meeting and you really want to discuss it, just going back to what kind of the district may or may not do, they may say, well, we can't meet for, I don't know, 2 months. That's not okay. And you need to push back. And again, to Jill's point on document, so write it down in an email. So you're literally telling me that you have no time for me and my concerns for the next 2 months, because they will somehow magically find a nice window of time, in a 2-week time frame to address your concerns. So just if you want knowledge and you want to have a conversation, that is your right. And you should, if you want it in a formal PPT and you want to document it, then you should not be hesitant to call that meeting just because it's the middle of the year.
Yeah, because essentially what the district is doing is limiting the parents' rights to the process of determining their child's needs and program going forward.
And when a parent is building that relationship with the school district, what do you recommend, or what would be a smart first step to take in building a collaborative process? So in an ideal situation where there is no tension and the family is just starting that relationship with the district, perhaps with or without an advocate, what do you think are some of the first steps the parent should take to really foster a collaborative and effective relationship?
I'll give you two.
I could just go ahead.
Okay, you jump in after me, Virginia, because I think you might say some similar things or piggyback on it. One is call a team meeting. I think it's important to informally meet your team and share with them a little bit about your child. And the other thing I think has been super impactful and helpful, and it kind of coincides with the parent statement, but to send a letter to your new team members and to say, hi, this is who I am. This is, you know, who's in our family. This is who you're going to be working with. These are some of my thoughts and concerns for my kiddo. But I think to start, the main thing I'm trying to reflect is start the conversation. So don't wait for the team members to come to you. Start the conversation with them via email, with a letter, or via asking for a formal team meeting, just to open up the doors of communication. Virginia, I'm guessing some of that was what you were going to say,
some of that was,
right?
One thing I was going to just say is, and I think that it was in the chat, but you know, I had a child with a disability as well, and I sat at the table, and I was a tough parent, but I didn't necessarily always agree with everything that everybody was saying at the table, but largely I was working collaboratively with them. But I always know they respected me, and they knew that I was coming at it from a place of love and all of that for my child. And I think, you know, my takeaway is you don't need to be scared to talk about your child and to be very honest and open with the strengths and the weaknesses and how to address them. Because, you know, I was definitely in there talking and noodling goals and objectives, and they were listening. And I think that was a very collaborative process. And, you know, that was helpful as a parent. So I think that they respected me for the time that I was spending and the care that I was showing, and that translated into the way that relationship worked. And I did have every summer I met with the vice principal before school started, and, you know, let's talk about the new team. And it was helpful too. And I knowing my daughter, like what would work for her. So I think not being scared to use your voice is a good thing you should have.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up with, I 100% agree with both of you have said, and really knowledge is power, and it can create a much more kind of even plate for having conversations about things. So the more you know about what your child's needs are or the process, I feel like it makes for a smoother collaborative process going forward, so that you understand where the district might be coming from and the district can understand where you're coming from. I think those things are very powerful. I also am always reminded that we're all professionals in that room. And what I tell parents is, I know this is a very emotional process for you, but you have to understand from the district's point of view, this is business. They very deeply care about your children, but this is their job and this is business. So we're going to try to put that hat on for today and to listen to things from that perspective, and getting to the place that we can get to that's the best for your child going forward. So sometimes stepping back and very carefully listening to what the district is saying or doing some research on it before you agree to it can be really helpful. So you have that knowledge going forward to make a reasonable decision.
It's a full-time job, guys. I mean, I literally have a number of families, and not everybody can do this, but I have parents who've quit their jobs, like even single moms who are like, I have to focus everything on my kid. And so it's hard. This is, someone once said to me, you need to get a PhD in your own kid. And you really kind of do. You know, you go and you educate yourself on all these things. And I'm not, it's so hard. Like, I need to emphasize that to people. This is not easy. And that's again, another reason why, if you have the ability to bring in a advocate via the Special Education Legal Fund, which has this wonderful program, which I'm so thrilled we're able to be part of, or by your own means to just educate yourself. There's no way you can have PhDs in speech and language, OT, special education, PT, BCBA, all of these different things, right? It's so hard. And frankly, we put on those hats at the best that we can, but because of the lenses that we have in our training, we are able to be a little bit of a jack of all trades and have that working knowledge, but we sit in it all day long. I mean, that's all we do. We're all on Zooms all day long, but we're reading files and we're asking questions and we're doing our own research. It's hard. It's hard work. So
to that point, somebody asked what are backgrounds for advocates, and it's there's always something related
different.
to special education in some area. For myself, it started with 2 of my children from a very early age, and then morphed into lots and lots of trainings, both statewide and nationally. COPA is a great organization that you can look into. And then getting my master's in special education with a concentration in assistive technology. So it's a learning process, but there are so many amazing people in this field that, we're all a very small community, and we reach out to each other and ask questions if we're not clear about something and what their recommendations might be. So it's a good community that way. We support each other.
I can only speak again to my background. I actually came in this a little different than a lot of the advocates. I started my career working with kids. So I worked in the school system as a school social worker, and just could not continue to stomach the things I was being asked to do or not to do. And by the end of my 10-year career in the school system, I was handing out advocates cards. So after I had a little bit of a stay away from education time with child number 3, there wasn't anything else I could do. My training is as a social worker. So it's bringing people together. That's what my master's is in. I used to run PPT meetings. I had no idea what I didn't know. I've learned so much more as an advocate. And I think, Anne, your point is so well taken. Our community in Connecticut is just amazing. And at a moment's notice, I have multiple advocates and attorneys that I can pick up a phone or text or send an email to. I have literacy specialists and speech and language pathologists and OTs and PTs that I've developed relationships with, and they're so giving of their knowledge and their time. So, I think that's super wonderful about our community. But that's my background. And
I'm a kind of a mix a little bit. I took COPA's class, so I'm a mom. My daughter is on the spectrum, and so when she got to a level where I felt like after my full-time job had left, as Jill said, because that was a big part of what I needed to do for her, I really had this need to kind of help guide other families through it, and I felt like I gathered so much knowledge. I used COPA and did take the SEAT 2.0 class. And then I thankfully did my practicum with Jill Chuckas at CTEA and have been working with her ever since. So, I think we're all kind of coming at it different. And that's why I think when Christine said you need to interview advocates to see where you're going to, connect with, because we all are a little bit different in how we approach things. That's important. And one thing I wanted to say, I noticed in the chat about when you go to an advocate versus a lawyer, my take on that, and I know Jill and I'm sure Anne does this too. A lot of times we get a case and I get it to the place where I said, it's time, you need a lawyer. Like, I can do no more for you. A lot of times, or we'll get a case that will come to us as a referral, and we'll say, you know what, given what you're talking about or what you want to do, you need an attorney. But other than that, an advocate can do a lot. And if your desire is to work collaboratively, to understand the process, to make sure your child is getting the appropriate level of services, all of that is something an advocate can and should be doing. So it's only those very like sticky points where you're at a crossroad where you just can't continue with where your child is, that you really are at that place where you absolutely have to seek the advice of counsel. And I know personally I've had meetings where I had just an advocate for my own daughter, and meetings where I definitely brought my attorney. And so, you just feel as you go through it, and it's a unique process, you'll know.
Yeah, and I can speak specifically to that because I was a special ed attorney, and actually Christine did I think I have a blog article that says I was a special education attorney, now I'm an advocate. And I practiced special ed law for about 10 years. And then when I moved out to the suburbs and started working a lot with, or just hearing the stories of families in school districts out here as opposed to New York City, I saw it was such a different atmosphere. And there was such a need for advocacy, and school districts seem to really know the children. And I think an advocate can be so effective, you know, and less aggressive to, you know, it's seen as less aggressive to the school districts. And, you know, I know that you don't really get too far by being aggressive or contentious at these meetings. You really want to have a collaborative relationship. And I think an advocate is a great first step. I think, you know, if you're looking for something that can't be recommended by the school district, right? Like you have a tuition you're suing for a private school, then you go to an attorney. But if you're really trying to work with your school district first, I think, you know, it's usually very wise to start with an advocate. One just little practical tip is if you go to a meeting with an attorney versus an advocate, the school districts will most likely show up with their attorney. They may also bring an attorney, even if you're going, a family is going with an advocate. But usually if you tell the team you're bringing an advocate to help you with the process, very often, you know, they will not consult with their attorney, and actually the advocate can be helpful to both sides and help the communication all around.
I don't usually have meetings or PPTs with an attorney present. And in fact, if that was the case, I think I would be a little suspect because we are not attorneys, and we talk. I meet with my clients before their meetings. We've all kind of gone through it. We have an agenda, but I'm not speaking for them or making a decision for them. I'm you know, working, you know, with that understanding, but I'm not. They're the parent, and they get to make the call.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, in the 11, 12 years that I've been doing advocacy, I can count on one hand how many times they've brought an attorney when I was coming. And I have always advised the parents that if the district is insisting on bringing an attorney, then they should at minimum consult an attorney. I had one case where both myself and the attorney and the parent's attorney came as well. So both myself and an attorney were there. But typically, if the district is insisting on an attorney, I'll roll off.
Yeah, generally we'll reconvene the meeting when the attorney is not there is what will happen. Because if there was need for an attorney at that point, the attorney would have already been involved with the parents. So I'm always a little suspect of it, like Virginia. But I just wanted to share that in my process, there are many things that I do that an attorney would also do as far as record review and strategy and figuring out what the needs are and looking at the case history. And I create a very detailed timeline. But if I get to the place where it's clear that an attorney is needed, and that's usually where I know somewhere there will either be a due process complaint or it will have to go to hearing, and which would require legal documentation written up, and I can't do that. That's unauthorized practice of law. So that's when I'll work collaboratively with an attorney to try to move the case forward. And generally, the attorney will rely on me to give all of that background information. I've already done the work, so it doesn't require them to do that all over again, which can save parents a lot of time and money. So that can be a helpful process. So that's usually where I'll draw the line.
And I see in the chat too, someone was commenting as a retired special ed teacher. Yes, often as an advocate when I'm there, especially once they know me, the special ed administrator will be part of that PPT. And I welcome that because often the teams need someone who is more knowledgeable in special education law and how it reflects on the IEP process. And most of the districts know me. And so I would say probably 75% of my PPTs have a special ed administrator in them. And it ends up actually, I think it's generally a benefit.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, I'm asking, or, you know, we find that we need that level of, you know, the questions we're asking, or the support that we're looking for. We need a higher level person that can make the decision. So, you know, I welcome that as well.
Yeah, make the decision and decide whether to spend the money on something that we're asking for. That's really what it is, as opposed to waiting a couple of days for a response, or a week or whatever, or tabling it for another meeting. Mm-hmm.
And for Anne and Virginia, who became advocates, I would assume in large part due to your own personal experiences, mm-hmm. Is there, you know, having first worn the hat of the parent, actually always wear the hat of the parent, and then you became an advocate, is there something you might have done differently in your role as a parent, something, you know, that you learned through being an advocate, some advice you would have given to your former self?
I wish I'd had somebody like me when my children were really young. It took a lot of time and energy to figure it out. It really did. I don't feel like it held the process up necessarily, but I feel like I would have felt more. I would have had more feeling of empowerment going into the meetings. I really did
starting
feel like
when they were babies, or
yes. Mm-hmm. After a while, I felt like I was educating the team. Like they just didn't understand the full ramifications of what the needs were and how to effectively help. But that's only because I've been doing all this research. Right. But I do remember when my daughters were really young, being in meetings and being completely overwhelmed and having no idea what they were talking about. And even reading over the documents, I just couldn't sift through the mud to try to really fully understand what they meant and how that program was going to be implemented. So it did take a lot of time to figure that out. And I think it would have been really helpful to have somebody explain it to me in black and white. Like, oh, okay, I got it now. This totally makes sense. So I don't know if it would have changed the outcome in any way. I mean, they're graduated from college and working full time. And so it's all good, but yeah, I think it would have been less stressful for me as a parent. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I'll definitely, Anne, I agree with that. And one thing that I go back to is I always thought I was doing a good job. And I had fortunately had some outside help, you know, with good people that were a private team for around my daughter that was helpful. But I can just remember the lingo, and I'll give a quick example. My daughter had a para working with her in the preschool environment. And I can remember saying this, she has a dedicated para. And the school team said, yes, dedicated. And then at the end of the year, so I'm thinking when I thought dedicated, what I thought was that my daughter had a person one-to-one. So my daughter was assigned to one para, and that was what was happening. So when I came back to the end of the year and my daughter still hadn't made the progress, and I said, well, I just don't understand. She has an aide. What happened? And come to find out that that aide was also supporting 3 other children. And I was blown away because I said, but I asked the question, is she has a dedicated aide? And they said, oh yeah, that aide is dedicated to her. She's just also dedicated to the 3 other kids. So asking that question and knowing to clarify that was a one-to-one is something that I did not know and wasted, I felt like, valuable time. So, you know, I think you know what you don't know. And I thought I was asking the right question, and I felt really kind of hoodwinked. So that's, you know, it's hard to document it all. It's hard to know what pages to put it on. It's hard to know what really questions to ask and how to ask them. And that's what I think Jill and Anne and I do in these meetings. And that's our role, is to make sure that we are documenting it on page, you know, if it's a disagreement and I'm asking and requesting for one-to-one services and the district's not agreeing, that they're actually putting that on prior written notice. And what does that mean? So, because, you know, that's something that I didn't do well as a parent in the beginning of my daughter's career. And she is also 19. So, and not graduated from high school quite yet, but did get into college. So we feel really good about where she's going.
And I guess, you know, it's almost 8 o'clock, but a few, or maybe one final question, and then if anyone else, wants to bring anything else up, we can stay on a little bit longer. But what is something you wish parents knew about special education advocates?
I've been talking about that the whole time.
Right. We're all wonderful people.
You're awesome. We are so
or
awesome.
Let's see,
we're really dedicated.
What's the most important thing, or one final thing you want to leave parents with in terms of what they should remember in this advocacy process of, obviously there's a big focus is on teaching parents to be advocates. Your parents are their best advocate. What do you think is the most important thing, or one of the most important things for parents to remember as they are acting as an advocate, or as they're going through the advocacy process with an advocate?
Don't limit your child. Think big. The district quite often will silo the child into 1 year time spans and not think long term. So it's important that parents continuously remind the district that they are responsible for creating an environment where the child can be independent by the time they leave, whether it's at the end of high school or whether it's at the age of 22. And independence in all areas, that they can be fully independent, functioning adults in society. So think big, think long-term, and always be looking at the IEP in terms of what will this look like 5 years from now? What will this look like 6 years from now? And remembering that transition process, or thinking about what your child's future goals are, starts at 14. So that's really a key aspect of their education, is to really start thinking about that in middle school, because the decisions that are made in elementary, middle school will affect the high school outcomes. So
it's interesting how you frame that, because it kind of piggybacks a little bit to what I wanted to share. And my comment is trust your gut. Mm-hmm. One of the first things I do when a family comes to me, and I have to gauge how much they're ready to hear. But part of it is I think about what the different paths could look like, depending on how far we can bring this and how much the district is willing and able to work with us. And so I tell my families, what are you really worried about? Let's talk about that. Let's figure, let's unwrap that a little bit. Because, we might be in elementary school and we're worried about them being able to read. But I'm also thinking ahead to myself to say, well, what is their profile? And if they can't get to a certain reading level, they're going to have a heck of a time getting a job. And if they can't motorically do X, Y, and Z, are they going to have the transportation ability to get to a job? Are they going to be able to live alone, and all those things? And those might not be questions that all my parents have, because the needs are very different. But I'm always analyzing, what is it going to look like in the next transition piece if we can't do X, Y, and Z here? So I just encourage families to really trust your gut. It's not always going to be right, but if you have a tingling in you that says something isn't going the way it should be, or I don't feel like the direction the team is headed is the correct choice for my child, then take a breath, sit back, do your research. And that research could be on your own, looking through things, or, getting your PhD in whatever the disability is that your child has. It could be consulting an advocate. It could be getting an outside provider to help support your child. Like there's a lot of pieces, but don't belittle your concern, acknowledge it and figure the way to the next step.
So I will just, those were great answers, but I think one thing is, your child is an individual. Every child is unique. And the document and the process is going to be their path. So, I think knowing that it's not just, it's not a lockstep process for anybody. And, so that I think is something that you should know. And also, it's your child. It's an emotional discussion for sure. And having somebody in there that can not be emotional when you are is sometimes very helpful. And so when I'm in a PPT meeting for my own daughter, I'm very thankful that there is somebody there that's on my side that I can trust, that can talk for me, because it's still my kid. And that's one thing that I think is great about an advocate is we have this knowledge, and we're there to fight for your child as hard as we possibly can, and work collaboratively as you know, and with the team as we can. But we're probably not going to get emotional, even though we love our families. They're not our children. And I think that that's, you know, a good distinction in that room.
All right, thank you so much. And I think, you know, you've all said this, but, and Jill, you mentioned this earlier, like, this is so hard. And I think, you know, just to wrap this up, I think we should remind all parents that are, you know, or whoever has taken the time to join in on this webinar, you know, that to be easy on yourself, and you're doing a great job. It's really hard to be an advocate. It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be a parent of a child with special education needs. And you're doing a great job also during probably the hardest times we've experienced in a long time to be a parent. So give yourself a pat on the back and have some ice cream and a glass of wine at the end of the day sometimes. And I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything, but otherwise we'll probably wrap it up. And you know, Christine mentioned this earlier, but we have a lot of great webinars coming up. You can follow Special Ed Legal Fund on any kind of social media to remind yourself of when the next webinars are. But this has been so much fun. This is such a great group. And I learned a ton of new things as well from all of you.
I just want to thank everybody for listening in, and I hope you were able to take away some information that could be helpful to you personally.
No, I'm grateful for the platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. And Lara, thanks for jumping in for Christine and everybody. This was great. And, you know, hope to see people soon.
In person, right?
Happy New Year. Stay well.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Cheers. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.